What is real? That question, older than human consciousness itself, resurfaces in cycles, as if the mind, restless and dissatisfied with the visible world, keeps returning to it like a castaway returns to the sea. Today, that question has taken on a new shape, pixelated, coded, technological. Films like The Matrix and series like Black Mirror have reignited the collective fascination with a seductive idea. What if we're living inside a digital simulation? A high-resolution video game created by a superior intelligence, running on a machine beyond comprehension. Even public figures like Elon Musk have popularized the theory. The chances that we're living in base reality, he once said, are 1 in billions. But what if we're looking in the wrong direction? What if, in our desperate search to find what's real out there, in code, algorithms, or artificial intelligences, we're ignoring the true simulation? The one that doesn't depend on technology, or external beings, or quantum computers. The one that's been operating silently, all along, within us. What if the most powerful simulation isn't digital, but psychological? Imagine this. Before we even entertain the idea of an artificial universe created by machines, we were already living inside an invisible theater, built from perceptions, beliefs, memories, and interpretations. An inner world that doesn't reflect reality, but filters it, distorts it, translates it through models we inherited, learned, and now repeat. The mind, tireless in its art of survival, creates versions of reality, molded by past experiences, current emotions, and future expectations. The real simulation, perhaps, isn't a conspiracy crafted by external entities, but an intimate, ongoing construction, crafted by ourselves, moment by moment. Think of a vivid dream. Inside it, everything feels real. Time flows, places exist, emotions spill over. You run, feel fear, touch walls. And only upon waking do you realize, none of it was real in the conventional sense, yet all of it was profoundly real in your subjective experience. What if waking life isn't so different? What if we're dreaming, but with our eyes open? This script is an invitation to look closely at this hypothesis, that the deepest simulation we live in is generated by the human mind, not a computational system, a simulation of the world, of time, of identity, of self. But this is not an attack on reason or objectivity. On the contrary, it's an invitation to clarity. Together, we'll walk a path where science, philosophy, and spirituality converge. A journey that begins in neuroscience and ends in the quiet awareness of consciousness itself. A journey to understand that what we call reality may be a story, one that can be witnessed, and over time, transcended. So take a deep breath and prepare to question the ground beneath your feet. Because perhaps the most important question isn't what is real, but rather, who is asking? Close your eyes for a moment. The world around you disappears. But does it really disappear? Or does it simply vanish from your perception? Now open your eyes. What do you see? You might believe you're seeing the real world, the light pouring through the windows, the texture of objects, the contours of the shapes around you. But the truth, scientifically unsettling, is this: you are not seeing reality itself. You're seeing a simulation. Not a digital simulation generated by some external supercomputer, but a neural simulation generated by your brain. This is the foundation of what's known as the predictive brain theory, one of the most revolutionary ideas in modern cognitive science. Pioneers like Carl Friston and Anil Seth assert, The brain is not a passive receiver of data from the outside world. It is an active generator of internal models. Rather than capturing what's out there like a camera, the brain acts like a probabilistic oracle. It predicts what is happening outside, and only then compares those predictions to the sensory signals it receives. When there's a mismatch, it adjusts the model. When everything fits, it simply reinforces the belief. In other words, what you perceive is not the world itself, but the model your brain built to interpret it. You see what it expects to see. You feel what it expects to feel. You live inside an interpretive universe that it's constantly designing. Think of how many times you've seen a face in a shadow, or heard your name in the noise of a crowd, or felt afraid in an empty space just because something felt off. This isn't your brain malfunctioning. It's your brain doing what it does best, simulating. It's a master of anticipation, and the cost of survival has always been prediction. Neuroscientist Anil Seth puts it this way: perception is a controlled hallucination. The only difference between hallucination and perception, according to him, is that in perception, the hallucination is shared. It is constantly corrected by sensory input, but deep down, both are fabricated. Here's a simple example. When you look at a cup, you don't perceive each photon hitting your retina. What you see is a concept of a cup built throughout your life, with shape, function, texture, and meaning. Your brain fills in the gaps automatically. It doesn't need to rebuild the world from scratch every second. It just projects what it already knows. It's as if you're walking down a hallway with walls painted to look like reality, but the painter is your own brain. This idea might seem unsettling, but it's also liberating. Because if what we call reality is, in part, a creation of the mind, then there's room to revisit, reimagine, rebuild. There's room to perceive not only what's out there, but what's being projected from the inside out. The psychological simulation isn't a flaw, it's an adaptive strategy. It allows us to function, to predict, to interpret quickly. But it can also become a filter that distorts, limits, imprisons. At every moment, your brain is dancing between external data and internal expectations. It's a silent choreographer, directing an invisible ballet of perceptions, assumptions, and corrections. You see what you expect to see, and when something doesn't fit the model, you discard it or force it to fit. That's how the illusion of objectivity is born. So next time you look at the world, ask yourself, is this real or just what my mind expects to be real? Maybe you're not seeing the world. Maybe you're only seeing what you've learned to see. If everything we perceive about the world is a simulation, what does that say about ourselves? Who is this I who thinks, feels, decides, reacts? We usually believe there's an essence within us, a fixed core, a stable identity, something that makes us who we are. But what if this I is also a simulation? Not in the sense of a superficial illusion, but as a sophisticated mental construct, shaped over years by memory, language, culture, and expectation. An internal avatar, carefully molded to fit into the theater of reality. From an early age, we learn to tell ourselves stories. I'm like this because my father was like this. I can never do that. I'm shy. I'm strong. I'm a victim. I'm special. These phrases seem innocent, but they are invisible bricks. Layer by layer, they shape the building of identity until this building becomes a home or a prison. The mind is a tireless screenwriter. It creates narratives, edits memories, reinforces patterns. It repeats phrases until they become beliefs. And beliefs, in turn, create the character you play. Thus, the self isn't something you are. It's something you tell yourself. Each thought about who I am is a piece of an endless puzzle. And yet, we cling to these pieces as if they were absolute truths. We forget that every story, no matter how convincing, is just a version, and versions can be rewritten. Cognitive neuroscience has already shown that memory is not a static archive, but an active reconstruction. Each time we recall something, we are, in fact, recreating it based on emotional and contextual filters of the present moment. This means that much of what we consider our life story is a coherent simulation, but it doesn't have to remain that way. You are not your story. You are the awareness watching that story unfold. But there's a powerful force keeping this identity simulation running: the ego. Not in a negative sense, but as a mechanism that needs a central I to maintain coherence in experience. The ego doesn't want you to notice the fluidity of identity because it operates best when it believes itself fixed. And so we carry on, daily reinforcing the character with small actions, reactions, and habits. If someone treats us differently than we expect, we feel unseen. But maybe we're not even seeing ourselves clearly. If the mind simulates the external world, it also simulates the I that observes this world. What if everything you believe about yourself is just the best version your mind has managed to compile so far? A useful version, functional, protective, but not necessarily true? And then comes the question, simple yet devastating. Who would you be without the stories you tell about yourself? Breathe into that question. Don't try to answer it. Just feel the space it opens. Vanity is important, yes, but it doesn't have to be armor. It can be a lightweight garment we wear as we walk through the world, but one that we can also remove when necessary to feel the wind directly on the skin of consciousness. The mind simulates who we are to make sense of experience. But there is something deeper that remains even when the I falls silent. Perhaps this something is what has always been here. Witnessing, feeling, being. Time is an illusion. That phrase, often attributed to Albert Einstein, sounds almost too philosophical for a physicist. But perhaps that's the point. Modern physics and ancient spirituality are beginning to touch the same truth. Time isn't as real as we think it is. For the human brain, however, time is more than real. It's inescapable. It is the backdrop upon which the entire psychological simulation unfolds. The human mind does not live in the now. It lives between what has already happened and what might still happen, between memories and projections, between undigested traumas and unreachable hopes. It moves along an axis that never stands still. Memory simulates the past. Anxiety simulates the future. When you blame yourself, you mentally replay what you could have done differently, a shadow theater of what no longer exists. When you worry, you project what might happen, a premature movie, its scenes written by fears rather than facts. But notice, the past is only accessible through memory, and the future exists only as imagined possibility. Both live inside your mind as simulations. Even in neuroscience, time is a construct. The brain doesn't have an internal clock ticking away hours. What we have are mechanisms for sequencing, ordering, and comparing events. And those mechanisms can fail. Have you ever noticed how time seems to fly on some days and drag on others? That's not time changing. It's you changing how you perceive it. Psychological time, as Eckhart Tolle might say, is the ego's primary tool. It needs the past to justify identity, and it needs the future to keep promising that something's still missing. That way, you're always chasing a now that never arrives. But where truly is the now? You can't think about the now, because the moment you try to think about it, it's already gone. You can only be the now. That's why the present escapes simulation. While the past is an edited archive and the future an emotional trailer, the present is the only space that can't be shaped, anticipated, or remembered. It just is bare, silent, uncomfortably present. And it is within it that the simulation begins to dissolve. When you pause, breathe, feel, time collapses. There is no yesterday. There is no later. There is only this vibration, this instant, this awareness of being. This doesn't mean time isn't useful. It organizes practical life, appointments, history. But when we fully identify with the internal timeline, we stop living and start performing. The mind loves to play with past and future, but presence doesn't play. It simply observes and smiles. So the next time you find yourself lost in worries or regrets, try asking, is this happening right now? Or is it just another chapter in the simulation of time? Breathing is returning, feeling is grounding, being is escaping, and the now is the only place where truth can be perceived without filters. You touch the wooden surface of the table. It feels solid, from present, but at the deepest level, it's not really there, or at least not in the way you think. Modern physics, especially quantum mechanics, reveals a disconcerting paradox. The physical reality that seems so concrete is, for the most part, empty. Atoms, which make up all material things, are 99.999999999% space. What we call solidity is actually an illusion created by the electromagnetic interactions between particles. You never actually touch anything. Your atoms and the atoms of what you're touching merely repel each other. And that's just the beginning. The double-slit experiment, one of quantum physics' foundational discoveries, showed that subatomic particles behave differently when observed. Yes, the simple act of measuring, of perceiving, alters the outcome. Reality, then, isn't just ambiguous, it's interactive. It responds to observation. It transforms in the presence of consciousness. It's as if the physical world were a fluid stage, adjusting itself to the eyes of the beholder. As if matter waited, in a state of potential, for someone to collapse it into existence. This doesn't mean the world doesn't exist outside the mind. It means that what we call matter is not fixed, absolute, or independent from the observer. It is condensed energy, vibrational movement, probability in a state of dance. Physicist David Bohm proposed that the universe is not made of things, but of processes, a reality in constant flow, where the separation between observer and observed is artificial. He spoke of an implicate order, an invisible, enfolded structure behind everything that manifests. A hidden tapestry, of which the visible world is just a thread briefly emerging. In cosmology, even the very definition of the universe is riddled with gaps. Most of it, over 95%, is composed of dark matter and dark energy. No one knows what they are, only that they affect everything. In other words, most of the universe is invisible, unknown, perhaps unknowable. And yet we live as if everything were obvious, as if reality were a rock, solid, static, objective. But maybe it's more like water, or smoke, or light reflected in a mirror. And here, a bridge forms to the central theme of this script. If external reality is already, by its very nature, ambiguous, impermanent, and responsive to observation, then the internal simulation we make of it is inevitable, and in many ways, just as real as reality itself. Because the mind doesn't only simulate ideas and memories, it also translates vibrations, interprets energies, and shapes perceptual fields based on beliefs. You don't live in the world as it is. You live in the world as your mind believes it is. Which leads to a new question. Where does the physical world end? And where does the mental projection begin? Perhaps the answer is nowhere. Perhaps the separation never existed. Perhaps reality, as philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty suggested, is not an object to be observed, but an experience to be lived. Thus, the ambiguity of matter is not a flaw. It's an invitation to let go of rigid certainties, to dance with the mystery, to realize that reality may be far more malleable than it seems. And if that's true, then what you call reality is not a wall you crash into. It's a mirror reflecting back the exact image your consciousness is ready to recognize. Amid so many simulations of the world, of the self, of time, one inevitable question remains. Who is perceiving all of this? There is something within you that watches thoughts, that feels emotions, that notices the shifting of reality, but does not change along with them. Something that has always been present, even if you can't name it. Something that is not the experience, but that which is aware of the experience. We call this consciousness. But what is consciousness? To many scientists, it remains the greatest mystery in nature. The hard problem of consciousness, as philosopher David Chalmers defined it. We don't know how or why brain activity gives rise to subjective experience. We can map synapses, measure electrical impulses, identify neural patterns. But we cannot locate the subject who feels all of this. Where is the self that feels pain? Where is the self that hears music and is moved by it? Where, after all, is the you reading this text right now? Some researchers, like Donald Hoffman, suggest that consciousness is not a product of the brain, but the very foundation of everything that exists. To him, the physical world is merely an interface, like a computer screen, and behind that interface lies pure conscious experience interacting with conscious experience. Philosopher Thomas Metzinger offers another provocative idea. No one is really there. The self, he argues, is merely a functional model created by the brain. There is no fixed I, only processes happening in flow. And yet, something perceives those processes. Something observes even the absence of self. Bernardo Kastrup goes even further. To him, consciousness is the ultimate substrate of the universe. Matter, time, and space are appearances within a cosmic mind, and each of us is a spark of that consciousness exploring itself. But let's set metaphysics aside for a moment. There is something you can verify right now. No theory, no belief, no effort. Close your eyes. Feel your breath. Notice your thoughts arising. The thought comes and goes. An emotion surfaces and dissolves. But something in you remains. That something is not a thought. It is not an emotion. It is that which perceives the thought and the emotion. This something cannot be seen as an object, because it is the subject. It cannot be touched, because it is the touch. It cannot be thought, because it is the space in which thought happens. You don't have consciousness. You are consciousness. And this consciousness, unlike mental simulations, is not conditioned by time, memory, belief, or identity. It does not need to defend, explain, or prove anything. It simply is. It is like the sky behind the clouds. The clouds change. They disperse. They take on different shapes. But the sky is always there, vast, silent, unchanging. Consciousness is that sky. The problem is we confuse ourselves with the clouds. We believe we are our thoughts, our social roles, our desires, our fears. But all of those are temporary phenomena that arise within consciousness. They are not consciousness itself. And so, while everything in the world simulates, transforms, and dissolves, there is within you a presence that watches. Call it what you like. Consciousness, presence, witness, being. No word is enough, but you can feel it right now. This perception, silent, lucid, timeless, is the only point outside the simulation. It is the unsimulated observer, the only place from which everything can be seen without a filter. And perhaps it is there that truth, not as a concept, but as a living experience, can finally emerge. Not every simulation is a mistake. Not every illusion is foolish. Sometimes, the mind simulates to protect. Life, in its raw intensity, is sometimes too much. The world is vast, uncertain, unpredictable. And the human being, fragile in biology, has, over millennia, developed strategies not just to survive physically, but emotionally. Among them, the most sophisticated, the internal simulation of safety. When we are hurt by loss, rejection, trauma, the impact is often so overwhelming that we can't fully process it in the moment. So what does the mind do? It creates internal safe zones, symbolic worlds where pain is softened or avoided. It tells comforting stories, creates protective beliefs, builds invisible walls around certain memories, and, above all, it projects versions of the self that appear stronger, more accepted, more in control. This is how psychological simulation becomes armor, light on the outside, but heavy within. Freud called them defense mechanisms. Jung saw them as the shadow, parts of ourselves exiled to the unconscious. Modern psychology speaks of mental schemas, automatic patterns of emotional protection. For example, someone abandoned in childhood might unconsciously simulate that they don't need anyone. Someone who was humiliated might simulate arrogance to mask insecurity. Someone raised in violence might simulate excessive control, rigidity, and predictability. Simulation in this context is an intelligent response. It prevents collapse. It allows life to go on. But there is a cost. The more we feed these survival-based versions of ourselves, the further we drift from what we actually feel. And this distance generates dissonance, exhaustion, disconnection. We begin to live in an inner world where everything is predictable, but nothing feels alive. We become prisoners of what once saved us. The mind, with the best of intentions, turns pain into structure. And the structure, over time, becomes a cage. The most unsettling part is that this defense is almost invisible. It doesn't show up as a block. It disguises itself as normality, as personality, as "this is who I am." And so we spend years, sometimes entire lives, mistaking the mechanism for our essence. But there are moments when the simulation breaks, moments when the pain leaks through the cracks. An unexplained cry, a silent emptiness, a deep existential fatigue. In those moments, something within us calls, as if whispering, "There's something more in here, and it's time to see it." To see doesn't mean to destroy the simulation. It's not about fighting it. It's about recognizing it with compassion. Psychological simulation, when seen with awareness, stops being a prison and becomes a path. Because behind every rigid belief, there is unfelt pain. And behind every pain, there is a deep longing for freedom, love, and belonging. Then we begin to see the ego is not the enemy. It's a bridge builder. It just doesn't know that one day we can cross the bridge and keep going without it. Simulating to protect yourself was necessary, but living to hide no longer is. You can thank your mind for keeping you standing and gently begin to remove the masks, not to destroy them, but to breathe behind them, where the air is lighter and life more real. How do you wake up from something you don't even realize you're dreaming? That may be the deepest question in the journey of consciousness, because the inner simulation doesn't announce when it begins. It's subtle, fluid, silent. It blends with your thoughts like ink in water. When you try to grasp it, it's already dissolved. But there are ways to notice it, not through effort, but through presence. The simulating mind is fast, but consciousness is patient, and it's in the slow rhythm of attention that truth begins to appear. Meditation, the silent mirror. Meditation is not about stopping your thoughts. It's about seeing thought as it is and realizing that it comes and goes, without control, without command, without solidity. In meditation, you sit as a silent observer before the stage of your mind. Thoughts come on stage, perform their dramas, their comedies, their tragedies. But you're in the audience. And slowly you realize, none of this is me. None of this is fixed. All of it passes. That's the moment the simulation begins to reveal itself. Because only what is observed, without identification, can be revealed. Even 5 minutes a day, practiced sincerely, can open windows in the architecture of the simulation. Mindfulness, the present that interrupts the automatic. Mindfulness is the art of returning to the body, to sound, to smell, to the texture of now. The mind simulates because it's always projecting what might happen, what should have happened, what could have been said, done, felt. But the now doesn't need simulation. It already is. When you drink a glass of water with full attention, something happens. The mind has nowhere to cling. It quiets. And in that gap between one thought and the next, there is space. And space is where simulation loses its grip. Self-inquiry, the loving blade of awareness. Not every question seeks an answer. Some cut through the veil. For example, what am I believing right now? Is this thought absolutely true? Who am I without this idea? These questions, asked with gentleness and curiosity, open cracks in the internal belief system. They're not meant to destroy, but to reveal. They show that there is more than one perspective, more than one way to interpret, and that maybe, just maybe, you no longer need to believe everything you think. A powerful tool here is inquiry as taught by Byron Katie, a simple yet profound method of internal investigation where each limiting thought is examined as if it were an object in your hands. You turn it, observe it, question it, and sometimes it simply dissolves. Guided practice, the thought that arises in space. Close your eyes for a moment. The thought will come. Don't force it. Just wait. When it arises, observe. Did you think that thought? Or did it simply appear? Now go deeper. Where did it come from? There is a silent space before the thought, a void full of potential. That space is your true home, and you can visit it whenever you wish. It's always there, even in the middle of chaos, even in the midst of pain. even in the noise of the mind. Realizing this doesn't require knowledge. It requires listening. The way out of the simulation isn't an escape. Many seek to escape the mind, the matrix, the system. But that's just another story. The way out of the simulation isn't a secret door. It's not a magic click. It's a subtle opening to what's already here. True reality isn't on the other side. It's beneath, behind, within, waiting for you to stop simulating, just for a moment. And in that moment, everything changes. You feel the body, the air, the ground beneath your feet, and you realize, I'm here. Before any thought, before any story, here. Throughout our journey so far, we've walked winding paths between mental simulations and flashes of presence. We've deconstructed the self, time, matter, and stories. We've explored the brain, the senses, and beliefs. But maybe the answer doesn't lie in denying one side, but in embracing both. What if the world is, at once, a mental simulation and a living, real experience? What if life is a dance between what we project and what quietly is? Maybe the mistake lies in trying to choose, in chasing the truth as if it were singular, pure, isolated. But what if truth is a game of layers? A tapestry where every thread is a perspective? The mind creates models. Consciousness observes them. Simulation gives us form. Presence returns us to the formless. The first protects us. The second sets us free. And together, they might just teach us how to live. Imagine reality as a watercolor painting. The flowing, mixing, redefining ink. Those are the internal simulations. But the silent, white paper beneath it all, that's presence. Both exist. Both are necessary. But only one remains when everything else dissolves. The world is not a lie. It is a mirror. And every mirror reveals something new, depending on the light you project. Thus, reality is not a riddle to be solved. It is a mystery to be lived. To live in this mystery is to know that every perception has a filter, but that there is a place within you that sees the filter. It's to act in the world without getting lost in the masks, to think without being trapped by thoughts, to feel without drowning in emotion. Maybe the secret isn't to destroy the simulation, but to dance with it with awakened eyes. After all, isn't that what the great masters always said? To be in the world, but not of the world. And now, perhaps we can say, to be in the simulation, but not a prisoner of it. Because what you truly are is consciousness in a state of presence. And that cannot be simulated. Maybe you're not trapped in a simulation. Maybe you've simply forgotten that you're dreaming. And now, something within you is beginning to wake up. Throughout this journey, we've uncovered the layers of the inner world like someone opening the doors of an ancient temple. We discovered that the brain doesn't see, it predicts. That identity is a story told to make sense of chaos. That time, the physical world, and even the self are far more fragile creations than we imagined. But behind all of it, like the silence behind a piece of music, something remains. Something that doesn't change, doesn't need to be believed or understood. Presence. It's always been here. Not as a philosophical concept, but as an immediate reality. A stillness that watches the mind without judgment. A space where everything happens without needing explanation. And from that space, everything changes. Not because the external world transforms, but because the way you meet it transforms. You no longer need to react to everything. You don't need to prove who you are. You don't need to uphold the characters you've played. You can simply return. Return to the body, to the breath, to the present moment, to what exists before thought. And in that silent return, the world reveals itself as it truly is. Not a prison, but a living stage. Not an oppressive simulation, but a creation unfolding in real time. A reflection of your own consciousness in motion. You are the artist and the canvas, the observer and the observed, the simulated and the awakened. Take a deep breath now. Feel the texture of the air entering. Notice the sounds around you without naming them. Watch your mind without trying to control it. And then simply feel. You are here. You've always been. Everything you seek, clarity, truth, freedom, is not somewhere else. It's right here, in this exact moment, where the simulation begins to dissolve. And what remains is simple, and real, and free. There's nothing to achieve, nothing to prove, nothing to figure out, only the return to what has always been present, even when you forgot. Presence is not a new place. It's the home you never truly left. And now, slowly, you're learning to live there again. Maybe you're not trapped in a simulation. Maybe you've just been dreaming. And now, you're beginning to wake up.